Hey there, this is Dan. You're watching the Salty Sea, and I am here to recap everything that went down on the competitive side of Adepticon in the Champs tournament. I am going to be going pretty deep in depth with this, but to start, we are just going to do broad strokes of the kind of winning metagame. There were 44 players in the tournament, which is awesome. That's great turnout. I don't know if it's the biggest North American tournament ever, but I think it's pretty close regardless. It's certainly one of the 5 or so biggest tournaments ever in Warcry, so it's great to see the game growing like that. So we had 17 players who finished with a winning record with 2-1-1 or better. 3 of them were on Soulblight Gravelords with vastly different approaches. The only similarity there was they were all really spamming with 10 plus models. We also had Caradron Overlords who won the tournament with classic cannons, pure KO with a balloon instead of like a daycare provider. We had Cruel Boys Monster Killers with a Brugit for the Beast Knob and 4 Egg Grots, also 2 monkeys. I love the monkeys in there. Horns of Hashut with 2 Flame Hurlers and a Myrmidon. Iron Golems with a Fomo Crusher and Toughness 5 Legionaries. 2 different Cities of Sigmar Castellites warbands, one which was sort of Horse Lord soup, and the other with like the regular gun line plus a War Hulk. That's kind of been the list going around lately. We also had Ogre Maw Tribes with a Tyrant, some Gluttons, and a 1 Lead Belcher. This was just very ogre-y with only 2 Noblars. Gloomspite Gits with a Crusher and an Ardboy boss as the allies. Stormcast Thunderstrike with Lord Imperatant, only 6 fighters, but the Imperatant has the same ability that the really popular Calthea has. And then it was running a Knight Relictor, which is actually one of my favorite models in the whole Stormcast line. And it has a kind of an interesting triple ability that I've wanted to run for a long time, so I was happy to see someone succeeding with that. Then we had 1 box Vulcan Flame Seekers. You love to see it. That was the only 1 box warband that cracked into the top 17 players, so you should be really proud. Scions of the Flame, which was Initiates and a Fomo Crusher. Nurgle Demons of a Varangard and a Lord of Afflictions. None of the fancy in-house units, just Plague-ridden Plague Bearers and then the 2 allies. Lumineth Realm Lords, which had Stone Guards and Wardens and some shooting. He was running a Kangaroo, which was pretty cool. And then Seraphon. It was very swarmy. It was like lots of Skinks and Saurus, and the biggest thing in there was a Sunblood. Very interesting, well built to the pack, I think, in terms of just having lots of numbers. Before we get into the lists themselves, I just want to say I have a sponsor for the very first time for this video. It is Paladin Roleplaying. You can use promo code SALTYC. I am extremely excited about this because I have been giving Paladin Roleplaying free plugs for years by accident because I once made a dice video where I talked about some of the pitfalls in dice making and what types of dice you can sort of find that will give you actually random rolls. And the most cost-effective dice I could find on the market were Paladin Roleplaying in terms of cost-effective and still having some of the precision and the precautions in place to actually make sure that their dice are truly random. And so I'm really excited to sort of present a sponsorship with these guys to be able to get you a discount with them. The Paladin Pearls are what I play with. I play with 3 sets of them, the gray ones, some sort of bubblegum pink ones, and some maroon ones. But there are other kind of crazy dice you can use too. I know at least one person has told me that they use the splatter version for their attack rolls. That's the one with the red splats in it, and it's very thematic for throwing attacks with them. The sort of 8d6 sets are really perfect for Warcry, where you can really just get 2 of them, one for abilities, one for attack rolls, and it sort of solves everything. And then you can track your wild dice with the 2 extra on your abilities. It's really great. They also, if you want to go a little step past sort of just the sort of utilitarian dice, which I do think are really beautiful anyway, but they've also got a wide range of luxury dice. There are semi-precious stone dice that are here. There are metal dice that have been machine cut. Metal dice are often like the most guaranteed to be very, very random. And they've got a wide range of those. They've got wooden dice, a whole different amount of luxury dice products that you can get at Paladin Roleplaying. They've also got some other sort of RPG accessories, things like that. You can go around their site. There's really a lot to see. So I'm really excited to be sponsored by them, and I hope you check them out and get some dice from there, because that's what I play with, and I've been playing with that for at least a year and a half. Now, on to the first place list. This is Caradron Overlords by Cisco Sierras. In his dagger, he had Arcanaut Admiral, an Arco with pistol, 2 Thunderers with Aether Cannons. Then the hammer was a swarm of a company captain and 4 Arcanauts. And then the shield was 1 company captain, 1 Arco, and the Skywarden with pistol and Skypike. That is the spear Skywarden, who's trying to stab you. Very interesting little setup to be sort of pure KO, no allies. Most people will say drop the company captain for one of the 2 company captains for another Arcanaut to try to turn that Skywarden into, use those 40 points to turn the Skywarden into like a bigger ally. But I kind of like the approach to just go pure here, and it was really cool. He blew a lot of people off the battlefield with Thunderers. I did in my sort of preview video. You can check that out. I'll link it down below. You can sort of sort by what we thought the list would do versus what the list can actually do if you're kind of obsessive like that. But we were saying, like, I think he's going to table at least one person at some point during the tournament. And he proudly told me he didn't table anybody. So he kept, even as he was winning, he was teasing me that he wasn't tabling people. No one was dying from him. So just your ability to, especially this was a very swarm heavy pack, as I'll get to in a minute. Many minutes, maybe more like 30 minutes. But this was a very swarm forward pack. And so having a lot of Arcanaut was really smart. And then your ability to just kind of shoot anything before you spread out onto the objectives with the Aether Cannons. I like the decision to have an Arcanaut with them in the dagger, because just in case you can't afford to run them onto objectives in turn 1, that way you can still just sit there shooting in turn 1, and then your Arcanaut can run onto an objective, something like that. So I luckily have an interview with him, and so you can check out what he says about the list right here. All right, I'm here with Cisco. We don't know tiebreakers, but it is looking like you will be the Adepticon champion. What did you play and why?
I played Caradron Overlords. Do you want me to break down the list or just go?
Maybe broad strokes first.
2 cannons, Admiral, and Balloon. The one with the stat. I forget the name of it.
Yeah, the spear balloon. I know the one you mean.
Yes.
Yeah.
I bought it because that's the faction I got into Warcry with. I got kind of yanked in because of my friends, because they were like, hey, we want people to play. I'm like, I don't know, fantasy's not my thing. And he's like, well, we got steampunk balloon dwarfs, and I was sold. So
nice.
That's why I played them and bought them.
What would be, because these lists are going to be online, if someone were going to try to play your list, what would your advice be for how they should try to pilot it?
So if you get a chance to look at the rules, always try to have the Admiral with the cannons, no matter what, but have them in the game as soon as possible. You want them round 1, round 2 max. You don't want them later rounds at all.
So, like, take a look at the pack.
Yeah, look at the pack, see which one comes out the most often, even if it's maybe not in the most favorable spot. You want them on the board sooner than later.
Sure. And then, like, what was the craziest thing that happened for you during the tournament?
I got, with a cannon, without for profit, with for profit, I did 20 damage in one shot.
Nice.
I pulled double sixes, and then next shot, snake eyes. So, evened out, but sure. I did a crazy amount of damage.
Sure. What was the craziest thing that happened against you?
Craziest thing that happened against me? My last opponent's Flamer almost nuked my entire unit of my Admiral, my 2 cannons, and 1 dude. So that was probably the craziest thing that happened.
Nice. And you still came back and won that one?
Yes, just he didn't wipe them out, and I was able to...
Oh, sure. So they all survived on a couple life.
They all survived barely, and I was able to pounce and get the objective.
Sure. Well, congrats on probably winning. We don't know 100% yet.
If I don't have it there.
Yeah, congrats on it, and thanks for talking to me.
Thank you.
So there you have it. Apologies for the sound issues. Adepticon is crazy loud. That room echoes like crazy. So you really do have to yell at each other. Most people by the end of that tournament, their voices are starting to go. But great to see a little bit about how to play KO from the person who won. Now let's take a look at the second place player, Mike Sansom, who also went 4-0. So, a lot of people consider that essentially co-champions. He came very close on kill points, which was being used as the tiebreaker. He had a dagger with a beast knob, a brugit, a gnarlwood howler, which is the monkey, and a clutchagrat. He had a hammer with a neck slicer with bone hacker, a clutchagrat, another clutchagrat, and then a shield with a harpoon, another monkey, and another clutchagrat. I wasn't sure about this list at first when I first saw it, and then on TTS he went 3-1 with it on his first sort of practice runs with the list, and 3-1 in a pretty competitive field on TTS looked pretty promising, which I was surprised by. The one thing I've sort of realized going into it, I keep seeing people, talk about how the Clutchagrat has one of the best reactions in the game, and I keep being skeptical because people keep showing me lists with, say, 8 models, and 2 of them will be Clutchagrats, and they'll be telling me the Clutchagrat reaction is incredible, and I'll just think like, well, how are you even getting the reactions off with your 2 Clutchagrats? You only have 8 fighters. You should never be able to get reactions off with an 8-fighter warband. It's just malpractice by your opponent. But the thing here is 10 fighters is a lot more than 8. And so when you have 10, you can react a lot easier with the Clutchagrats. The Clutchagrats just run around onto objectives. And of course, the monkeys are incredibly points efficient. The harpoon has one of the best triples in the game, and the beast knob is really nice with a brugit. And he talked a lot about being cagey. I actually really want to show his interview first and then maybe talk about playing the list after that, because I do think that more and more people should pick up Monster Killers. I think they are becoming one of the defining factions in the metagame right now. So congratulations on, we don't know tiebreakers 100%, but probably taking second in the tournament.
For sure.
So let's back up. What did you play and why?
So I played Cool Boys Monster Killers, and I just wanted to have a really nice serious day of Warcry, trying really hard, getting nice and sweaty. No, I played Monster Killers, but I brought 4 Eggrots because I painted them all like, what was it? It was it's like a 90s cartoon. Oh, I painted them as Ninja Turtles.
Sure.
So, yeah, loved it. I built the entire list based on making them all Ninja Turtles, and everything's painted and kit bashed to be Ninja Turtles. So.
Yep. And you had done pretty well. You had played 2 tournaments with them leading up to this online, right?
Yeah, on TTS. I played a couple of them. I don't play as well on TTS. I feel like I'm thinking about so much. But yeah, it's fun. Congrats, man.
Having played you in real life, I've noticed that too. You are much spikier in real life than you are online. And what would be like if you were to give advice for someone who wants to try to pilot that list, because it'll be online for anyone to see.
For sure.
If anyone wants to try that list out, what would your advice be?
Yeah, it's play it cagey for the most part. You kind of want to set up your eggs in a way that they're not getting smashed right away. You don't want them to get cracked open early because you just lose models and stuff. And I think that's the biggest thing. Pick your battles, know when you want to get in there, and know when you need to kill. And honestly, today I just picked the times when to play really aggressive, because when they spike, they spike. If I didn't get good rolls, I'm not. They didn't do nearly as well. So they're an aggressive warband. Play cagey until it's time to smash.
All right, and then what was the wildest thing that happened for you?
Man, I don't think I missed a single roll in the final game. I think I hit almost every single thing. But actually, in the third game against Fred, shout out to him, Warcry Club. Fred Shred over there. He and I were playing, and I was very scared against the big fly guy in the Vanguard. And I was like, I don't think I'm going to fight that fly guy at the beginning of the game. And then we ended up fighting, and it just went crazy. He missed something, and then I just absolutely devoured it with my beast knob.
Nice.
So it was a fun time. Not for me, not for him.
Sure. What was the craziest thing that happened against you?
Ogres not killing me when they should have killed me definitely helps. Yeah, ogres, just tiny little eggs, and they're just surviving out here. Got the hard shells, lots of calcium in there.
Nice.
Good chicken diets.
Well, congrats on the tournament. I hope you figure out how to keep that headband on straight.
No, this is how it's supposed to be.
Okay.
Dude.
Thanks. So, of course, I had to bury the lead there. He was fully dressed up. He actually wasn't the only person dressed up. One of the Ogre Maw Tribe players, Kyle Fry, who was the winner of the inaugural Adepticon, was also dressed up as a pirate, and he had pirate ogres. So I love to see that kind of community playfulness. I think Mike is absolutely one of the treasures in the community as far as what he does, his mastery of the game, both analytically on the board and like socially as part of the community, is really something to behold. The thing I want to pick out from that interview that's really important is, well, first, his headband not coming off. People, get your headbands custom fitted, okay? Secondly, is the need to play kind of cagey with a list like this. Monster Killers are full of pretty delicate things, but luckily delicate things that can function while staying out of arm's reach of the opponent. In some ways, this is kind of a shooting list. The Beast Knob really wants to be in melee, but has a shooting attack if he's not. The Harpoon is one of the better shooters in the game because of the ability. And of course, the Clutch of Grots really don't want to be in combat. They want to be holding off and reacting if someone does come near them. And so the need to sort of play, when he calls play it cagey, it seems like play sort of with your opponent at arm's length from you, and then the ability to kind of counterpunch the second they get inside of your sort of actual threat ranges. The two monkeys will help you a lot there with their ability to kind of traverse the board and kind of collapse on the opponent the second they overextend into you. Now, whether you can actually make that work in game is going to be something else, but I do think this is a great starting point. I think you can definitely try this out. You can also try it out with 9 models, turning in 2 Clutch of Grots for, say, another one of these neck slicers, something like that. But a lot of really cool options. I loved the fact that he went all in for Ninja Turtles. I loved the fact that in the interview he blanked on the name of the cartoon when he was dressed up as the cartoon. It's beautiful. Everything about this was maybe one of my favorite tournament performances of all time by any player. Mike, I'm just so thankful that you play Warcry and not some terrible game like Kill Team. Let's go into Austin Lewis. Now, I don't have the deployments for Austin's warband, but he had 3 wins and 1 draw, and he played King Velmorn, a lot of Velmorn's kids, and then 2 Black Knights, and a couple Graveguard, a couple regular Graveguard, and 1 zombie, and then also a Necromancer to have a little bit of range poke, but mostly, the support and the resurrections, the extra sort of the extra outlet for resurrections and the possibility of a broken quad. Really interesting sort of getting his perspective on it, so I'll let him speak for himself. Hey, so I'm here with Austin. We're checking out his warband. We don't know tiebreakers for sure yet, but it's looking like he'll take third. Austin, tell me about what you played and why.
All right, so I decided to bring Soulblight Gravelords today. And as you can see, I brought in most of the Underworld's warband Sons of Valorn, and I brought in a Necromancer. And honestly, my 2 winning pieces, you can see in the back, are both of my Black Knight horses. And the reason I decided to bring these guys in today is they have it's a 10 model count, and I got a little bit of speed in the back with the Ram, as well as we kind of have some nice 3 dice, 3 strength with the crits on 4. So even though the horses are not amazing, they're actually the best part of my warband. They can go where they need to, they can ram into things, and if I get some crits, then they're looking really hot.
They do the one thing the rest of them don't, right?
Yep.
Yeah, totally.
Absolutely. And so why I brought this list and why it's designed the way it is only because it is well rounded out. Obviously, my leader's not going to die with his bodyguard right there. The Necromancer, he can go ahead and help his minions on that quad. He's got a little bit of range. Everything designed on the team is to just be equally rounded. I'm lacking in some kill power, but I make up for it everywhere else.
Cool. What would be, if anyone wanted to try a similar Soulblight list, what would be your advice for how to pilot it?
Oh, you know it right there. I mentioned it. Those 2 horses. The biggest thing is don't use the horses right away. They're kind of your hidden piece of what you want to do with them. Everyone's looking at Soulblight thinking you're going to resurrect someone, so they're going to look at those triples, and you can kind of bait them and move it around a little bit where they think you're going to resurrect someone, and instead you move that horse all the way in and crush someone or steal an objective. So use your minions to your advantage, get them in there first, and then use the horses to seal whatever you need to.
Awesome. What was the craziest thing that happened for you the tournament?
Craziest thing that happened was Vampire Lord came straight into killing that zombie right there that you see. And my leader, the Sons of Valorn, he ended up having a quad, and I ended up getting 7 crits and killing a Vampire Lord in one shot.
Incredible. Thanks so much for meeting with me.
You betcha.
So great stuff from Austin there. I really like the trend of how, each of the top 3 were focused on having a lot of bodies and then having some form of power projection, some way to reach across the board, whether it was, the Harpoon and the 2 Monkeys for Mike, whether it was the Thunderers and the Sky Warden for Cisco, and then the 2 horses for Austin. And the way he said they were his MVPs because they were able to get across the board and reach out to, just take out one thing. You could put them both on the one thing you needed to kill, something like that. So really interesting trend. Now, whether you think that's the pack or whether you think that's just generally good Warcry is kind of up to you, but a really interesting trend between the top 3 there, and just, really great advice for how to play the lists. Also, with 3 wins and 1 draw was Kyle Knapp. I didn't get a interview with Kyle, but this is a really interesting sort of pure control list. He built this to completely abuse the resurrection mechanic in Soulblight Gravelords. He had a Vampire Lord and then a bunch of Underworlds fighters. Lists like this are hell to play against because you have to remember what makes each profile different. It's very annoying, but as long as it's legal, you can't really blame people for bringing it, right? And then the really cool choice that Kyle made, and I wish I'd talked more about this on the preview show before the tournament, is the 2 control pieces from Flesh Eater Courts, the Marrow Scroll Herald and the Abhorrent Cardinal. They are Flesh Eater Courts sort of leaders that I don't think are all that good in Flesh Eater Courts because there isn't enough efficient bodies in FEC to make them necessarily work. Like, they need to do more when you have so many or so few bodies like FEC does. But here, you have a lot of very points efficient bodies. You have the ability to resurrect them. And then the Cardinal or the Herald can both sort of run in and cripple one opposing, high value target, which gives you a ton of flexibility to sort of mess around with your opponent's ability to score points while just flooding the board. So you get way ahead on board presence, and then you just kneecap your opponent's ability to remove those bodies, and to actually catch up. So a really cool strategy here, like a very fully formed sort of thesis on the game and what wins in Warcry. And with 3 wins and a draw, I would say, he succeeded. I think that's really impressive. So those were sort of the top 4 in terms of standings. There were just 2 4-0s, 2 3 wins and a draw. So that was everyone who was undefeated. And so great job by all of them, never losing once. And then, of course, you saw the sort of full metagame before. But I want to talk a little bit about my own tournament experience. It was a bit of a comedy of errors. I had a list I planned on running. I've played a lot of Scions of the Flame now, 14 games with them. I'm 8, 4, and 2 with them. I planned on running a Blazing Lord, a Fomaroid Crusher, and an Immolator, and 6 Initiates with Morningstar. What I had to run instead was the Blazing Lord, the Fomo Crusher, an Exalted Deathbringer with Axe, a Fireborn, and 4 Initiates with Morningstar. One of my Initiates was removed from my box for being a bad guy. It's the one that is the Carrick Acolyte over... it's actually kind of hidden in the back there behind the Blazing Lord. But the Carrick Acolyte got removed from my bag because it was a bad guy. It has a scary mask. and another one of them was removed as well by my daughter. And so they didn't make it to Adepticon, so I had a bit of a panic of what do I run instead. Instead, I ran this 8 model list, which is much worse, but still was kind of serviceable. You know, a FOMO Crusher can do stuff, although the boards were not favorable to it. Exalted Deathbringers are actually okay. So I didn't get to do what I think is the really powerful thing that Scions can do. That's not super powerful, but is at least solid, where you have tons of initiates and you put your opponent's fighters in these overlapping Venn diagrams. With only 4 initiates, there weren't enough to kind of cover the board that way. But, you know, things still worked out okay. I still won more than I lost. Just don't, if you were like looking up lists on, you know, War Tally or BCP, something like that, and trying to net list the lists, stay away from the one that I ran that's up there online, because it is not good. It's just kind of a mishmash of guys, and it's not good. The one that I had been testing and happy with is the one with lots of initiates, and then the Immolator, who has a really interesting horde clearing ability. So you have 9 bodies, and then if you're behind on bodies, chances are those bodies are pretty small, to which point they are quite vulnerable to the Immolator. Especially anything with 8 wounds is just really easy to destroy, because the Immolator can, you know, on 5s or 6s can really bring it down. And then, you know, initiates following up with him are just really good at plunking the last couple wounds off from far away. And so that's a really solid formula for clearing hordes from your opponent. But without the initiates, I couldn't afford the Immolator and have the 9 bodies, so that was too bad. Let's get into the pack. We played Supremacy, Bloodshed, Most Dangerous Game, and Ley Lines. I'll kind of tell you how it was when I played them each, but I'm really interested in the ability to actually break these down with math. There have been so few tournaments with enough people playing them for us to actually get like a real sample on each of the missions. But here, 22 games is enough where, yeah, it's not ironclad, but some trends can start to emerge that are really worth looking at. So the first one being, how many bodies did you want to have for these missions? And then the second one being, like, is shooting a new consideration for Warcry? I've been feeling this for a while, and it was part of my last meta video that sort of point-and-click warbands are starting to do better and better. I have my own theories for that. You know, I think it's mainly, you know, the biggest thing is the fact that Tempest's Eye was destroyed from Cities of Sigmar. You can no longer have a whole bunch of the factions in the game with access to Swift as the Wind. So it's much, much harder for slow, points-efficient warbands to respond to a shooting warband. And then the other is Games Workshop has been really experimenting with putting out broken shooting warbands like recently. Like Wildercorps are really good. You know, Order of Aesir stuff is really good. Cities of Sigmar shooting is really good. And so they've been really upping the power of shooting recently in the game. And, you know, before it was really just KO, and then a little bit after that they came out with Hunters of Huanxi. But now there are a lot of shooting warbands, and I think it's starting to tilt the meta a little bit, and so I wanted to test that a little. And just jumping in here to say that the nerf to Rampage was actually the first sort of subtle shift towards shooting, where really fast fighters, like if we were to take the Mindstealer Spheranx as a Chaos ally at the same points cost as the Fomeroid Crusher, the Spheranx was already behind by a little bit, but Rampage really nerfed those faster fighters, where its ability to turn 1 alpha strike you, it used to be, if it was on the battlefield, there was a 40% chance that the Spheranx might just be in your face right away from no matter what deployment it started on. And now that's just much less likely to happen, which was just a very small incremental shift towards helping shooting out that then moved on into Swift as the Wind nerf and the newer warbands. And then finally is, do you want to have the biggest fighter on the field? And really interesting results there. So Supremacy, when the pack came out, a lot of people complained that Supremacy was the first mission that we would be playing, because the sort of sense was it skews really far to hordes. And boy, were the sort of knee-jerk reactions right on this one. You know, like the communal wisdom was absolutely correct. The list with more bodies was 11 and 3. on supremacy. That is wild. That is a huge disparity. To the point where it's practically the only thing that matters. Shooting warbands were 5-2 versus all melee warbands. Now that actually surprised me, because when I played this with my Scions, I essentially won because my opponent had a bunch of archers in their dagger, and they didn't have a really good shot to really cripple me much, like in the very first activation, and still get to the objectives. And so they could only get like 1 or 2 shots off, and then they had to run to the objectives to score them. Otherwise, I would just bury them in points. And so then they ended up having to essentially meet me at the objectives, at which point I just kind of chopped them up. So the thing here is, generally it seemed like warbands with just a couple shooters were doing pretty good, especially if it was coming in round 2, where you could move up to an objective and get a shot in, usually because you'd have enough space to do that, and then just be shooting from the corner into one of these 2 contested objectives for the whole game. So that was, I think, a really powerful place to be. But it's not like, at least for me, I felt like it's not hopeless against shooting. You can just meet them at the objectives and chop them up. But I think it turns out my experience was not what most people's experience was, which is why data is more valuable than anecdotes, right? One thing I did notice, so for big guys, the warband with the biggest fighter, went by points, but the warband with the most valuable on points fighter were 11-8. So they had a winning record, but not massively. The interesting thing about that is all 3 of the times when the player with more bodies lost, their opponent had the biggest fighter on the board. Now that seems like it would be, of course, but what it really means is people with sort of a more mid-range skewing warband, right, with more of their points values skewed towards the center and not a lot of bodies, they were not doing well on this mission. Nobody ever won on this mission where their opponent had more bodies than them and their opponent had the biggest thing on the board. Now we get into Bloodshed, where this is Reaper, but with almost like an objective count condition for running towards the center. This is a really fun mission. I had a blast. I had a really fun and a little heartbreaking game against Soulblight Gravelords. Soulblight are just so well tuned for all of these Reaper-like missions because they can resurrect fighters and make them not count for your kill points, so that they just basically get to steal the points from you as you're playing. And so it's really difficult to play against them, and yet still I was able to kind of do things so that I had 2 dice rolls. I was about 40% to win either dice roll, and so your chances of winning one of the 2 dice rolls is about 60%. So I'm feeling good, potential to get the upset, and then I just don't get either dice roll. So that's fine. You don't get to complain. 60 is not that different from a coin flip, but to kind of navigate into having a coin flip against Soulblight Gravelords felt really good here. My opponent, Matt, was really awesome. Loved him. One thing that also made me kind of proud later was finding out on the numbers, the player with more fighters was 11-5. Just a tiny little change to secondary scoring in Reaper just completely shifts the balance of power to where this is a horde mission, because being able to consistently win the secondary every round is really powerful. And then the fact that a lot of hordes have the ability to essentially cheat the scoring system. And when your big guy, basically normally on Reaper, you can, if you have the biggest guy, you can kind of get him up front assaulting your opponent's warband, and you can really get your chaff kind of running away behind him. But here your chaff can't run away, so your opponent's ability to kill your chaff is not hampered the way it is in normal Reaper. And so actually having just one big guy as opposed to like a few people chaff hunting, or maybe even not even having chaff, can actually be sort of not where you want to be. So the player with the biggest fighter won 7 and lost 14, which I thought was fascinating. So it's like numbers mattered the way they did in Supremacy, but having big guys was flipped opposite. Also, the players with shooting were 10 and 4 against those without. And here, at least, it really makes sense because you could put your archers on the edge of the bubble, sort of in your own sort of safest area, and then just start blasting. And your opponent would have to try to cross the distance to you. But the 5-inch bubble, the 5-inch radius bubble, it seems like not that much more than 3. But remember that because of how you calculate the area of a circle, a 5-inch radius circle is almost 3 times as big as a 3-inch radius circle. And so that area is pretty huge, and your ability to kind of put things forward while having your archers in the back is sort of very much like accentuated here. And I thought all of that was really interesting. The other thing is that on objective missions, a really big fighter can kind of pick one objective and just be, this is mine now. I'm just going to win the fight on this objective on my own, and you can't come anywhere near it. And you even have to think twice about coming near the objectives that my fighter can now walk to. But in that massive 5-inch bubble, one big fighter is kind of swimming in it. And so its ability to kind of deny the area is really curtailed, which I thought was very interesting. So a really fun mission. Just absolutely, you should put it in your packs. Just know that this isn't Reaper. This is a swarm mission that very much favors having big swarms and is not for players with killing power. Then we had Most Dangerous Game. This is one of the ones that I designed quite some time ago in the original title pack. This one, 21 games, there were 7 draws. Now, you do expect draws to come more often later in the tournament as players are more evenly matched, but 7 is a lot. Some interesting things with numbers, though. The player with more fighters was 5 and 8, so generally being more elite was a small advantage here, which was kind of cool. This is the only mission in the entire pack where the elite warband was favored. And even then, it wasn't by that much. So this was a very swarm forward pack, as you could see by the top 4, for example. Then shooting warbands were 3 and 3 against non-shooting warbands. I found that very interesting. Big guys, the player running the biggest fighter was 6 and 8, so very, very close. But to me, this just showed that the anti-Titan mechanic appears to have really helped mid-range warbands a lot, right? Because here you wanted to have fewer fighters and not the biggest fighter, which is interesting, right? Because then you wanted, essentially, if you were in a position like, say, Stormcast are always in, where your cheapest fighter is very expensive, but your most expensive fighter is not very expensive. That's actually a really good place to be here because you never end up having a fighter on your team that gives up 3 points. That sort of extra anti-Titan bounty mechanic there turned out to be pretty influential, I think. It definitely made it so that normally these types of kill missions, you really want to have a really big guy. And here, the big guys became enough of a liability that they were a bit of a problem. Now, I do somewhat feel like I need to take the numbers for this one and the next one as, with a small grain of salt, because the question is, are they balanced because they're balanced missions, or are they balanced because the field was sorted by Swiss standings at this point? So everyone was sort of playing against warbands that were more similar to theirs. Essentially, the first 2 missions just sorted all of the swarm warbands to the top and all of the not swarm warbands to the bottom because of what you needed to have in order to win those missions, which is a, I think, important lesson for people TOing tournaments. Never put 2 missions that favor the exact same thing back to back at the start of a pack. Now, the Adepticon TO is not really a Warcry player much, so I don't think he could have been expected to know that, but that is something that TOs who do play Warcry need to consider. So jumping in here again, because I don't want to move on without talking about the game I had. It was really fun. My opponent was named Nick. He was playing Ogres. He ended up doing pretty well in the tournament as well. He was the Ogre player who went 2-1-1. We had a really exciting game back and forth where I was trying to kind of dance around his Tyrant, but I still needed to kill Ogres to score points on the mission. I could only get to 1 Noblar, so that one died real quick, but I ended up sort of swarming one of his Ogres, the Lead Belcher, with my mid-range fighters, and then like desperately needing to kill it before his tyrant could deal with, a couple chaff units and then that were in its way, and then come kill my mid-range fighters. And that worked out. And then as the tyrant came over, I positioned everyone behind my FOMO crusher so that it could just be big base in the way in a choke point while everyone was hiding behind it. I literally had my entire warband hiding behind a single FOMO crusher. But then Nick is kind of surveying the board. He's down a point late in the game, and he looks at one chaff unit that he had managed to get 4 damage into, and he looks at his tyrant and he goes, okay, I'll move up 1 move to get within range, and we'll just take this Hail Mary dice roll. And I look and I'm kind of dismissive. I'm like, well, okay, you need a crit and a hit to kill it, and only 2 dice on the tyrant attack. Rolls it. He knows what his only out is. He plays to his only out, and he nails it. 6 and a 4. Gets out, gets the initiative off the board, ties the game. Pretty epic. Really well done by him. I think a lot of people, I was so convinced I had the game like completely wrapped up. Even when he said like, oh, I'm going to try this dice roll, it's like the chances are so low. I was really dismissive, but he did a really good job. A lot of people would have been rattled in that situation, and instead he just kind of surveyed his options and tried to find, his 10% outer, and he nailed it. And so that was really cool to see, and a really fun game. So yeah, had a great time with you, Nick. Finally, we have ley lines. There were only 2 draws here. The player with more fighters was 10 and 6. It was certainly better to have more fighters, though the one way that you can defend yourself if you have fewer is by trying to win initiative and then trying to have as few objectives as possible on the board. That was my strategy, and I ended up getting a win against a really awesome Sylvaneth player. Ryan Betts was he's from Dayton, Ohio. He was my favorite game vote for the entire tournament. He was amazing. But yeah, I ended up sort of winning initiative in a couple crucial times, or winning not initiative in a couple crucial times, so that I could lock down so that there were only 2 objectives the whole game, which meant that his extra numbers didn't get to count for as much against me. Shooting warbands were 6 and 4 against non-shooters. So essentially we're seeing this anytime there is a point to sit on that you want to have shooting in your list, which I think is really interesting. 6 and 4 isn't like a wild skew, but it is just a little advantage, and that is very interesting given that advantage is played out against all of the other ones. The player running the biggest fighter was 7 and 12, so falling behind again. Though the interesting thing here was, once again, every single time a player with fewer models won, they had the biggest fighter. So all 6 of those games where the player with fewer fighters won, all 6 of those times they had the bigger fighter, which was fascinating. The reason the 10 and 6 number doesn't add up to the same as 7 and 12 is there were a lot of games where the players had equal numbers of models because they had been, sorted throughout the pack to a point where, again, the hordes were at the top of the meta and the elites were at the bottom because of the first 2 missions. So I do think that's really interesting that the only way to get the upset was if you had the biggest, stompiest thing that could just take one objective and win it. It's been a thing I've talked about in Warcry a lot, is smalls and talls, essentially, where you want as many small people as possible and then the biggest thing. I think this is a really interesting piece of analysis where it's really here you want a lot of smalls, but it's nice to have one big guy to defend against something like your opponent being able to just turn on one objective. It appears to, I think, have a lot of standing for specifically objective missions, but not really the other 2. So I found that very interesting where, that paradigm is just really dominant on objectives, but not necessarily what gets you ahead otherwise. So my tournament pack takeaways. First of all, mystery pack is bad. Don't ever do it, ever. Because it's usually So when people say that they like having a mystery pack of not telling people what are going to be the missions beforehand, it's usually said because they don't want people to skew to the missions. They don't want sort of wild, crazy, people like cheesing because they know what the missions are. The problem is, they assume that that means you'll just take a balanced all-comer list, right? But the actual effect is the opposite, because your pack, once you do release it, is going to skew towards something, right? Like this was a like horde pack where you just wanted as many bodies as possible. If you could have, you would have wanted 15 bodies on this pack, right? And so if you just release it and a bunch of people have brought, different kinds of lists, all of a sudden they find that their list is just completely unplayable in the pack. And there was nothing they could have done about it. So they just show up, and then you tell them that actually you don't get to play Warcry. Like, you have 8 fighters, and your plan on objective missions is something like You Mess In or Over My Dead Body, but the first mission is going to be 6 objectives. So those abilities do nothing. And then the second one is a swarm objective mission, but with no objective on it. So once again, those abilities do nothing, right? So now if you showed up with 8 fighters and like some clever anti-objective tech, you don't get anything. You aren't even allowed to play in this tournament now, right? And so if you had released the pack beforehand, people would have been able to actually play to it, and you don't get this situation where people with very normal lists just can't even play Warcry. I think that's really too bad. I think it's really sad that the 2 biggest tournaments in Warcry of the year were, they were essentially run in a way that is a hindrance to playing quality Warcry. Like, a lot of the missions in the Warhammer World event were just terrible missions that produce non-games. You can go back and look at the tournament pack there. There's like 3 non-game missions in that tournament pack. The missions in this were all kind of individually fine, I would say. Supremacy is a pretty bad mission, but it's not unplayable by any means. All of the missions individually were fine, but the way they were stacked up and the way they were ordered just decided that a third of the people at the tournament just weren't allowed to play Warcry, which really stinks. And so mystery packs, just do not do them. I'll certainly, beg for Kevin to not do it this way, because I just think it's so harmful to the community to set up a mystery pack like this. Just please give people the missions at least a couple weeks in advance so that they can take a look. What was even worse was the missions. It was a mystery pack, but then the missions were released like 2 days before the tournament. And so some people had a chance to change up their list or test some of the missions. And most people did not, because most people had their last testing games the weekend before, or, something like that. And so it just created even more skewed haves and have-nots system. So instead, just give the open information, let people choose to either analyze the pack or not. Let people, express skill that way if they want to, but don't ever for a minute just think that because you're not showing people the missions that you are somehow creating balance. You are doing the exact opposite. And I just want to reiterate, I mentioned this very briefly, but I don't want people to sort of be upset at Kevin here for running the tournament the way he did. He did an incredible job. BCP broke halfway through the tournament. He had to redo everything. He had to learn about wartally.com and sort of migrate the entire tournament onto a different system midway through a tournament. It was truly incredible. There were things like, people thought that tournament quests would be the tiebreaker, and he couldn't quite figure out how to make that work, so he made kill points the tiebreaker, things like that, him just like rolling with the punches. And yeah, it wasn't ideal for people, but like he was doing every single thing he could to make it a good tournament. Like, I think he did a great job. This sort of pseudo rant that I've gone on in this video is more about just best practices. And listen, it's not Kevin's fault that he doesn't play very much Warcry, but as a community, we have to talk with him, engage him, and just let him know that, listen, you can create these bad experiences or these weird experiences for people if you sort of try to do things in ways that, again, like seem positive but have these unintended consequences of actually creating the opposite effect of what they're meant to do. All right. The second one is that secondary scoring actually matters. We actually have real test cases now to show, before it's just, we have a lot of people reporting like, yeah, it's kind of more fun to have missions that have a secondary scoring objective. But here we see that the secondary scoring really, really mattered. The minor shift to Reaper made it from Reaper, a mission where historically is favored just like having a lot of output, to making it completely favor hordes, just like drastically favoring hordes. It already favored shooting before, and it still favors shooting, but now the balance of elite to swarm has like completely shifted the other direction. Then Most Dangerous Game, the secondary, really did succeed at promoting mid-range warbands, and that was something that I had hoped that I had achieved with that mission, but I had no idea, and so to see it actually play out made me really happy. Supremacy and ley lines don't have a secondary. I mean, ley lines has this secondary strategy of changing how you want to use your wild dice, but those two not having a secondary really made them have fewer wrinkles and a bit less interest than the other two missions. So I think this is a great showcase for the two community missions, essentially being much more successful and interesting than the two GW missions in this pack, which I think is a great sort of sign for what the community is doing and showing that, we're not crazy. We do understand this game, and I hope that GW kind of gets with the program a little bit there. So that's everything I've got for Adepticon. I had a lot of fun in the competitive event. I hope that seeing some of the archetypes in the top inspires you a little bit. You can check out all of those lists are on wartally.com. I will put the link down below in the description. And until the next one, may all your rolls be crits.